Coming up on The World Today. Coronavirus vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech appears to protect 94% of adults over 65 years old. Tigray leader vows to keep fighting as government advances. U.S. safety regulators clear Boeing 737 MAX plane to fly again after 2 deadly crashes in 2019. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. The coronavirus vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech appears to protect 94% of adults over 65 years old. More data released from their ongoing phase 3 trial suggests that it works equally well in people of all ages and ethnicities. The companies say they will now apply for authorization for emergency use of the jab in the U.S. The findings are based on 2 doses given to more than 41,000 people around the world. Last week, Pfizer and BioNTech published preliminary data showing the vaccine offered 90% protection against COVID-19, and there were no safety concerns.
In my view, the Pfizer-BioNTech is probably the most well-focused of the vaccines because it uses only this thing called the receptor binding domain. It uses a particular fragment of the spike protein as a vaccine, which means that pretty much all the antibodies that are generated are going to be neutralizing. So they're going to be antibodies that can actually stop the virus binding onto its receptor. The particular data I think that's interesting, because of course the RNA vaccines are completely new, is the safety data. There was some concern about that. The amount of RNA that was used in the very early experiments from Moderna was very high, and that caused some concern. They've now reduced the dose, and the adverse events reported by the Pfizer trial are no more than you would expect from randomly what you would find in that size of trial population. Compared with this sort of laser beam approach of the RNA vaccine, which focuses exactly on what you want, many of the competitors do look a little bit clunky. You could argue that this data that's coming from the RNA vaccines heralds the new form of vaccine that's going to become predominant going forward. And anything that looks a bit old-fashioned, which needs tissue culture, which needs a lot of manufacturing in plants around the world, that all begins to look a little bit clunky. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just looks like last year's model of car.
In the meantime, U.S. regulators with the Food and Drug Administration have approved the country's first at-home test kit that can detect the coronavirus in only 30 minutes. The self-administered Lucira COVID-19 all-in-one test kit is not expected to be widely available until the spring and is forecast to only cost around $50. It will only be available by prescription at first and only for those diagnosed with COVID-like symptoms. U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar praised the development, hailing it as another tool in America's expanding arsenal of COVID-19 testing options. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C. joins us now on the situation. Maria, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So starting with the positive news from one of the U.S. vaccines candidate, Pfizer. Maria, this is great news for the U.S., but authorities say they will now apply for authorization for emergency use of the jab in the United States. What does this imply?
This implies that it will probably be used before the end of the year, and they're really looking for those healthcare providers that are on the front lines providing care to those with COVID-19. With the increase of cases in the United States, it's going to be critical that those frontline workers are able to have this vaccine by the end of the year. It's expected that even though this emergency use might get approved and the FDA might move this forward, we're still looking at well into the late winter and springtime before it could be more widely used.
Well, across the country's authorities have been imposing new measures to curb the spread of the virus. So far, what's the level of compliance been like?
Well, that's some of the reason for some of the very strict restrictions that have been put in place, because many people have not been complying to some of the guidelines. And so we are in a place now where you're even being required to wear a mask just anywhere outside of your home, not just inside of facilities, but when you're going down the street, when you're in a park setting, you're being required to wear a mask. And that's just due to the fact that people have not been complying with many of the regulations around the number of individuals in a space at one time, social distancing guidelines, and obviously the suggestion to wear a mask at all times, not just when you're inside of a facility.
So do you think that these new updates with the vaccines will change the opinions of those who haven't been complying so far?
The updates with the vaccine will allow for, I think, many people to try to get the vaccine to ensure they can go back to what they believe is life as normal. But we are still in a long road ahead. Dr. Fauci has even said we're looking at 2022 before we're really going to see major impacts from the vaccine or any treatments that will come out, even with those being slated for late this year, early next year. And so we are still a long road ahead because the number of vaccines that will need to be available to ensure that we're able to curb the spread are going to be enormous. And it still will require social distancing, mask wearing, and people to be conscious about the various restrictions that have been put in place to ensure the spread of the coronavirus does not escalate to where we're seeing it at today.
And I mean, you're mentioning 2022 before the vaccine can be actually effective. So can we expect the announcement of more restrictions in the coming days, especially with key holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up?
We're expecting to hear from the state of Maryland with further restrictions today. We're expecting to hear from Washington, D.C. with further restrictions today. We know that states like Illinois, Washington, Oregon, many states have been putting restrictions. We also people are watching to see, because Texas has been a hotbed for the virus here recently, and looking to see if Texas is going to put in any type of sweeping restrictions in place. But we can know for sure that definitely once we get to January, if the projected next presidential administration comes in place, that we will be seeing some more sweeping federal mandates come out regarding the restrictions to curb the spread of the virus. And so we are in times that we are watching cities and states increase their phasing approaches and rolling back to what we consider to be phase one.
And Maria, just one more question before I let you go. The U.S. has approved its first rapid at-home test. So what more could you tell us about this?
Well, these rapid tests are going to be definitely, I think, widely used. People are very anxious to get back to work. Many jobs are requiring COVID tests in order to come into the office. But not only COVID tests, but also having to monitor what they do outside of work. But this will allow people to have more availability to be able to show that they are COVID negative, or to be able to address the virus much earlier if they're COVID positive. And so the price point is very minimal in comparison to, I think, what people believe the impact will be. And so we will probably begin to see a wide number of individuals in the U.S. Taking this and ordering these home kits so that they can then get their results back much faster, and obviously will not have to wait in some of the very long lines that we see across the country for testing.
All right. Well, Maria, thank you so much for joining us today, and please do stay safe out there.
Thank you for having me.
In other developments, Dutch health authorities this week opened a massive coronavirus testing site in the central town of Utrecht in a bid to ramp up its ability to quickly spot new outbreaks of the disease. The site in Utrecht is the second of a total 8 large facilities planned throughout the Netherlands, meant to finally end the shortage of testing and lab capacity, which has hindered the fight against the coronavirus in the country since late February.
Yeah, this is a so-called extra-large facility in Utrecht. Something nice to tell about is that we can test 800 people an hour at this so-called extra-large testing facility. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen, but of course the flu season is coming. As we know, it's winter at the moment in the Netherlands, so we just want to make sure we're ready for what's going to happen.
The European Commission has recommended that Eurozone governments should keep spending next year to support an economic recovery from the slump caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, but make sure the extra stimulus is temporary and targeted. Eurozone governments sent the Commission their draft budget plans for 2021 last month for checks on whether they are in line with EU rules. The EU executive arm says some of the planned spending by France, Italy, Lithuania, and Slovakia are not temporary or matched by offsetting measures. The Commission also cautions Belgium, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain that their already high public debt would worsen during the pandemic, so they should pay attention to fiscal sustainability in the medium term.
Due to these extraordinary circumstances, debt levels will inevitably rise for companies, for households, but also for governments. So member states should take supportive measures that are targeted, temporary, and do not permanently burden public finances.
Thank you, Valdis. Good morning. We ask especially Belgium, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain to consider the fiscal sustainability in the medium term of their situation. Overall, the euro area fiscal stance for next year continues to be supportive, and this is the right stance at this time and helpful for achieving a more balanced policy mix in the euro area. I want to clarify that this doesn't mean that we are not approving, supporting, or we are considering negatively these measures. The problem we are addressing is the problem of their non-temporary nature. So they could be very positive measures for the economies of these countries, but we ask member states to take note of the fact that they are not temporary.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has appeared in Parliament via video link to answer opposition lawmakers in his weekly Prime Minister's question session. The 56-year-old is currently self-isolating at his official residence in Downing Street, moments from the UK Parliament, after coming into contact with a lawmaker who later tested positive for coronavirus. Opposition Labour Party leader Keir Starmer opened the session by challenging Johnson's recent comments to his own Conservative lawmakers that devolved Parliament in Scotland was former Labour Prime Minister's biggest mistake. Johnson answered by accusing the Scottish National Party of using it to campaign for the breakup of the United Kingdom, albeit by incorrectly referring to the party as the Scottish Nationalist Party, which earned him a correction from Parliamentary Speaker Lindsay Hoyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by sending my best wishes to the Prime Minister and all those across the country who are doing the right thing by following the rules and self-isolating. Mr. Speaker, devolution in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. Until now, whatever our disagreements, there's been a very broad consensus about devolution. So why did the Prime Minister tell his MPs this week that Scottish devolution is, in his words, a disaster?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what has unquestionably been a disaster is the way in which the Scottish Nationalist Party have taken and used devolution as a means not to improve the lives of their constituents, not to address their health concerns, not to improve education in Scotland, but constantly, and I know this is actually a point of view that is shared by the Right Honourable Gentleman who leads for the opposition, but constantly to campaign for the breakup of our country and to turn devolution, otherwise a sound policy from which I myself personally benefited by when I was running London, but turn devolution into a mission to break up the UK. And that, in my view, would be a disaster. If he doesn't think that would be a disaster, then perhaps he could say so now.
Still to come on the program. Christmas with a twist. In the midst of a pandemic, decorative Christmas candles in Greece look a little different this year. We'll show you how in just a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching The World Today on Channels Television. The Ethiopian government says that its forces have made major military gains in northern Tigray and are marching on the regional capital, Mekelle. The Tigrayan insurgents, however, say they are putting up resistance at another town, Alamata. Refugees from the region are continuing to pour into Sudan, giving harrowing accounts of bodies dismembered by explosions or people being hacked to death. Many people are also displaced within Tigray less than 2 weeks after war broke out.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed called on the public to join him in a 2-minute ceremony on Tuesday to honor the members of Ethiopian National Defense Force fighting against the Tigray Special Forces. In Addis Ababa, crowds of people took part in the ceremony, which included 1 minute of silence and 1 minute of applause. But not all Ethiopians are happy with the government's decision to invade Tigray.
And these people who are doing this, they are our brothers. We know. I don't want to like this. They have done their best. But how could they kill their own brother and their own sisters? This is not our custom.
The Prime Minister also warned that a deadline for rebel northern forces to lay down arms had expired, paving the way for an advance on the Tigray region's capital in a 2-week conflict shaking the Horn of Africa. Africa's youngest leader and the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Abiy Ahmed, launched airstrikes and a ground offensive on November the 4th after accusing the local ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, of armed revolt. But Tigrayan leaders say Abiy, who comes from the largest ethnic group, the Oromo, has persecuted and purged them from government and security positions since taking office in 2018. Meanwhile, Tigrayan forces fired rockets into the neighboring nation of Eritrea last weekend, widening a conflict which has already killed hundreds of combatants and civilians and sent about 30,000 refugees into Sudan.
Senior Republicans and U.S. allies have voiced alarm that announcement that the large number of American troops will be removed from Afghanistan and Iraq. The U.S. Department of Defense confirmed that the United States will withdraw 2,500 troops from both countries by mid-January. President Donald Trump has long called for troops to come home and has criticized U.S. interventions abroad.
The Trump administration is reducing military presence in Afghanistan by 2,000 troops.
By January 15th, 2021, our forces, their size in Afghanistan, will be 2,500 troops. Our force size in Iraq will also be 2,500 by that same date. This is consistent with our established plans and strategic objectives.
President Trump's advisor states that the president is keeping true to his promise that he made 4 years ago when elected to office.
So 4 years ago, President Trump ran on a promise to put a stop to America's endless wars. Today, as just announced at the Pentagon, President Trump is keeping that promise to the American people. President Trump understood that the way to end those wars was to adopt a peace through strength approach to the world. He rebuilt the American military, which had been decimated by defense sequestration under the Obama administration. He required our allies to step up their game. And America's NATO allies are now spending $400 billion in additional defense spending over the next 10 years. And they've contributed more troops to conflict zones in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
This reduction comes without support from Congress and other career military administrators.
I think it's extremely important here in the next couple of months not to have any earth-shaking changes with regard to defense and foreign policy. I think a precipitous drawdown in either Afghanistan or Iraq would be a mistake. I've so said publicly yesterday, and I hope that's precisely where these discussions end up.
The Trump administration plans to execute this removal of troops while evidence of the region being stable has not been proven. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
The head of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, Steve Dickson, has signed an order permitting the grounded Boeing 737 MAX to fly again. Mr. Dickson says he is 100% confident in the safety of the aircraft, which was banned from flying after 2 crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia, which killed 346 people. The FAA's decision means the aircraft could return to the skies by the end of the year. However, the FAA is calling for extra training for pilots to deal with new safety features installed on the airliner. Boeing has welcomed the FAA's move, saying it was committed to learning from its mistakes. And finally on the show today, amidst the coronavirus pandemic, decorative candles in Greece look a little different this year as Santa has adorned a blue surgical face mask. This forms part of a candle maker Alexio Gerakis' effort to raise awareness about wearing a mask. Gerakis, like many business owners, is afraid he won't open in time for Christmas after Greece went into lockdown this month to control an abrupt spike in COVID-19 cases that has caused concern among health experts. Thessaloniki is one of the hardest hit cities where hospitals are overwhelmed with cases. Gerakis says he is also planning to sell on the internet, but would rather see customers in his shop. Well, definitely excited that Christmas is approaching, and those little masks, I guess, are just a sign of the times. That's all we have for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening.